My name is Dr. John Taccarino, and I'd like to introduce you to our exploration of the roots of success. These roots of success are basically those factors which essentially establish a readiness to succeed. The concept for this is something that came out of really the work of Dr. Leonard and myself in terms of trying to understand the how and why of success. And in terms of this process, we've identified what we consider to be an S factor, a success factor, something which is basically universal, the human condition that essentially determines whether one is ready to succeed or perhaps those factors which are maybe blocking our ability to succeed. And in terms of this, the basic elements of the S factor are not seen as really necessarily something that's genetic, but something that's developmental. It's something we can change, something we can alter in ourselves. I'd like to apply this concept of success readiness to a family which has achieved a great deal of success, and particularly in America and internationally, the Kelly family. You may not know a lot about all the members of the Kelly family. You probably know a lot about Grace Kelly. She was an individual who so obviously has attained an iconic status really within the world culture. But it's not just Grace. We know a lot about Grace. I want to talk about Grace. But first I want to take a look at the roots really of the success within the Kelly family, the beginnings of it, going back in time, back to the 1860s. When the Kelly family was in poverty, really. The members of the Kelly family at that time, the ancestors of Grace and so on, were the Mary Kelly, and John Henry Kelly. When they first left Ireland and went to America, they left Ireland at a time where they were experiencing the after effects of the potato famine, where half the Irish population had been lost due to either emigration or death by starvation. Only a short time previously. And then the family left for America. And when they got to America, it wasn't easy. It was hard times at first. The Irish weren't welcomed. Times were tough. It was difficult to attain employment. And John Henry Kelly went from job to job and in and out of employment during the early years in America, the 1870s. But at that time, they began building their family, having children and so on, that essentially were their riches in many ways. And that Mary Kelly very much believed in the success of the family. One could achieve what one wanted to achieve and so on. One was going to work hard at it and so on, to persist. So particularly this aspect of internal motivation and self-regulation, she really believed you had to motivate yourself from within, that you had to push to try to succeed in life. You try to have goals for success and try to realize those goals. So Mary Kelly was very much of this kind of founding mother of the Kelly family. Her husband, John Henry Kelly, was a hard worker. He worked with Mary and so on to try to establish the roots of the Kelly family in America. And the first Kelly member who really broke into what you might perceive as a level really of success was Walter Kelly, who in the 1890s and the early parts of the 20th century became very well established in vaudeville, became a favorite of many of the American presidents. He had an act called the Virginia Judge, which was very popular. And he brought back to the Kelly family, to his mother and father and his brothers and sisters and so on, the fruits of his success. And he shared that and made life easier for his younger brothers, particularly George Kelly and John B. Kelly. Perhaps the next Kelly who achieved a high level of success was George Kelly, who was very, taken with his mother's Shakespearean tales and so on, who became interested in literature and drama. I think that he felt that in many ways that even though he had talent and ability, he was not taken seriously as a playwright initially because of his lack of formal education. But he pushed himself. He had a goal, and he tried to achieve, and he did achieve. He won a Pulitzer Prize in drama. For his plays. 6 of his plays became motion pictures. He became one of the great playwrights of the 1920s. Now his brother John B. took a different path to success. John B. essentially looked at sports as his avenue of success, and he worked very hard, spent hours and so on working as to try to develop further his talents as a rower, an oarsman on the Schuylkill River when he was a child. And it paid off. In the teens of the beginning of the 1900s and so on, he became a champion oarsman. He won the American Championship 5 times. He really valued himself. He had a motivation to try to achieve this and so on. He had self-potency. He tried to work hard to try to achieve that goal. But he had his setbacks. He had those factors that were in some ways perceived as defeats. Maybe not of his own making, but some things had to do with some factors in life or situations and so on, kept him from attaining what he was seeking to attain. The major events in rowing, the Henley Regatta, the Olympics were all canceled in the period of the First World War from 1914 to 1918. These events weren't being held. And Kelly at that point then himself was drafted into the military, into the army, and he served in France. But he still tried to develop really himself as best he could. He sometimes would try to be planning for future races in some of his off time. But he also was a great boxer. And he took part in the Allied Heavyweight Championships competition in France during the First World War. And he was very successful at that. He went to the semifinals, and he won the semifinals. And he was to fight Gene Tunney, who later became the heavyweight champion of the world. And unfortunately, just before the bout for the championship, he broke his leg. And I think looking at, say, his ability to, say, deal with defeat and a setback such as which was horrible for anyone when he had this chance, really, the opportunity to maybe even take the step to becoming the heavyweight champion of the world in boxing. But rather than letting this break him, he looked at another challenge, the challenge of going back to America after the war and continuing his rowing career. And he kind of said, an example was resilience, that heck, I can row sitting down. It doesn't matter about what the condition of my leg might be. I'm an oarsman. That's what I really want to do anyway. And so he basically found ways really of taking setbacks and finding bases of focus to try to do what he could do to achieve. And so after the First World War was concluded, he came back to Philadelphia, and he continued to train really and really focused more attention to his goals of winning the Henley Regatta and the Olympics and so on, and becoming this great oarsman. But unfortunately, another setback. When he applied for the Henley Regatta, the most prestigious competition in rowing, he was turned down. Basically, the reason given was that essentially he had worked as a laborer as a child and so on, as a young adult. And he was not seen then as a gentleman in the context that those at the Henley Regatta would perceive a gentleman to be, and he was not allowed to row in that competition. And as a result, he then saw this again as a setback, obviously, but instead of like giving into it and breaking him in some way, he just became more motivated to push for his ultimate goal of becoming this great oarsman. And he made a challenge to the champion of the Henley Regatta to face him in the Olympics. And that person was Jack Beresford, who at that time was considered the greatest oarsman in the history of the sport. And when they faced each other in the Olympics, there was a great competition between them. And one element of it, which perhaps even complicated the situation, was that the doubles competition was to be held a half an hour after the singles. And so Kelly at one point was thinking that perhaps he shouldn't row in the singles because he didn't want to disappoint his cousin, who was his a rowing mate in the doubles competition. But the cousin said, look, everyone is behind you, America's behind you, the Irish community is behind you. You've got to do it. And he did it. He rowed really for those who were supporting him, those who were his foundation. And he took on the challenge of trying to beat Beresford. And it was a terrific race. The race, the Olympic gold medal in the singles competition. They were neck and neck for most of the competition. Kelly found something in himself. He drove himself. He used that aspect of his success drive, his ability to use his self-potency to find that extra bit within himself, that extra element within himself, to push himself further and further and further away from his competitor until he finally won. And he won the competition. And he established himself really as a great champion in rowing. But through that, it's now considered the greatest race in the history of rowing competition, this competition between Kelly and Beresford. But that wasn't the end of it, because it was still the competition for the doubles. And he moved on to that, perhaps in a state of extreme fatigue. He had to be carried to the next competition. He was just so weak after the tremendous effort he put into winning the competition against Beresford. Now he's rowing again. And he found this extra part of self, that extra element within himself. Again, he drove himself, and he won that as well. He and his rowing mate won the doubles competition. And was the only rower in the history of the Olympics ever to win 2 gold medals in the same competition. So that established him and became a legend, really, of sports in America in the 1920s. He was there in the pantheon of great sports heroes with people like Jim Thorpe and Dempsey in boxing and Babe Ruth in baseball, Red Grange in football. And he was part of that. And he also rode again in the Olympics in 1924, and he won a gold medal in that Olympics. So at that point, he was ready to retire. And he paid his attention really primarily to his construction business after that. He started his construction business with a loan from his two brothers, Walter and George, who gave him $5,000 to start his construction business. And from that, he developed a major construction company that built a lot of the major public buildings in the East Coast. And he also built and founded Atlantic City Racetrack. And so he achieved not only sports success, but certainly financial success as well. He married Margaret Meyer in 1924, and they began their family soon after that. And he later became involved in politics in the 1930s. He ran for mayor of Philadelphia in 1934. John B. Kelly's decision to run for mayor in Philadelphia was actually quite a challenge because in Philadelphia at that time, the Republican Party outnumbered, say, voters of the Democratic Party by 10-1. So essentially then it was a great challenge to actually seek this competition. In this case, he almost won this election despite the odds being very strongly against him. And he ran on a reform ticket, and it really caught the eye of President Franklin Roosevelt. And Kelly then became a favorite of Roosevelt's. He called him the most famous, perhaps one of the most famous men in America, and perhaps the most handsome men in America. So he thought a lot about Kelly. He thought a lot about what he was and what he could accomplish politically and so on down the line. And so in 1940, Kelly was picked to give the nominating speech for Roosevelt at the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia during that period. And then there was even some talk that if Kelly was seen as a person who had essentially was valued and liked by Roosevelt and might be seen as an attractive, perfect candidate if Roosevelt would run again in 1944. So the idea of a Roosevelt-Kelly ticket was very much of something that was being discussed in terms of the next election. And but Kelly, for whatever reason, decided to drop out of politics in the early 1940s. He left politics and devoted himself really to his family and to his business pursuits. And he led a life that from then on was basically emphasized public works and charity and so on until his time he died in 1960. And later the statue was erected to him in Philadelphia. And he was certainly known at that point then as the greatest oarsman in the history of the sport. And that later his son and he became the only father and son individuals in the Olympic Hall of Fame. The next person I might look at is, again, talking about the son, is kind of a segue into that. His son, John B. Kelly Jr. The son was very much a protege of his father. When he was 6 years old, John B. erected a little lifeguard stand on the beach in front of their home in Ocean City, New Jersey, and taught him to row. And took a lot of pride, really, in his son's prowess and development as an oarsman. And later on, Kelly won his first race in a lifeguards competition in Ocean City in 1944. And they went on. By 1948, he won the Henley Regatta and redeemed really his father's goal, really, of Kelly winning the Henley Regatta, and led to his becoming really the winner of the Sullivan Award as the top amateur athlete in America in 1948. Later, Kelly went on to achieve success, particularly in terms of politics, becoming a city councilman in Philadelphia. And later he was the president of the American Athletic Union, the AAU. And it was in this role that he had changed a lot of the policies toward professionalism in athletics. Prior to that, you couldn't compete in an athletic competition, either in amateur sports in America or in the Olympics, because professionals, individuals who obtained financial support for their efforts were banned from competition. Kelly changed that. It was through Kelly's efforts that was changed. And so the whole Olympic movement and so on was changed as a result of Kelly's efforts to redefine what a professional is, as how it relates to the Olympic movement. And then later on, Kelly became the president of the the Olympic Committee of the United States and planned the Olympics at Los Angeles in 1984. But unfortunately, he died himself prior to that, and he left a great sense, really, of contribution, really, to athletics in America as a consequence of so many aspects, really, of his sense of goals and the achievement of those goals to advance athletics. The next person is obviously probably the most famous person in the Kelly family. That's Grace Kelly. But of course, when you looked at her really in terms of early development, some of the aspects which we might see as part of Grace in terms of what she became in terms of a major national figure certainly weren't there when she was younger. I mean, they're there maybe behind the surface, but her father saw her as a child that was perhaps not nearly as success prone as some of the other members of her family. She was quiet, somewhat introverted, and so on. She was overweight as a child. But by the time she was 16 years old, she blossomed into this great beauty. And I think that even that sense of being quiet and so on within her personality perhaps belied the steel within her personality, that she had a lot of the factors that we associated with the success readiness were already there. And even though her father really was encouraging her to go into the field of drama and to the theater, she wanted to do it, and she did it. She went on to New York and attended drama school in New York, really against somewhat her father's wishes. The father really didn't support her to a large extent, but rather than she thought the father really didn't really see her potential in some ways, but she saw her own potential. She valued herself. She had very much of a sense of self-value, and she believed she could become a great actress. And when she was not supported really by her family, she took it on her own to try to find bases for success. And she made her own money. She became a model. She was on the cover of a Red Book magazine. She made a number of commercials and so on. She supported herself as she went through drama school. And then through the help of her Uncle George, she got an agent, and she began getting some roles on particularly television, where she worked through live television and things like the Philco Playhouse and some of the live television dramas of that time with people like Steve McQueen and Newman and people like that and so on, who became major actors later on, but they were starting together. They were beginning of the early beginnings of television in New York. Then she went from there to her first few minor roles in film, and then her first breakthrough was the picture High Noon, where she worked with Gary Cooper, and the picture was named Best Picture of the Year, and that's how she started. And then she went from there to success in Mogambo and Rear Window, and winning an Oscar for The Country Girl, and To Catch a Thief was another major picture, which introduced her to the French Riviera, where she first met really her future husband, Prince Rainier. And then later on, he proposed, they married, and then she became the Princess of Monaco and became this international figure. And you're looking at all these aspects of the S factor. She had them all. I mean, she had self-valuing. She had internal motivation and self-regulation. She worked hard. She didn't quit and so on. She had adversities, but she kept at it. I think she was very humble despite all this when she was on camera and so on. She could present herself in a certain way, but she was also very nice to people when she was off camera. And that brings us to the area of affective effectiveness. She could turn it on. She could be, if you go onto a set where Grace was present, which was making a movie, she might be sitting and talking to the people, the crew and so on. She would look like a wardrobe mistress. She wasn't made up. She was wearing an old maybe T-shirt or sweatshirt or something, and just kind of laid back looking and so on. And then when it came time for her to perform, she'd go to her dressing room, then she'd emerge really as this swan, this princess, whatever it may be, to dazzle everyone. She could turn it on when she had to. But also in terms of interpersonal effectiveness, the other element was that she was just a very nice person. And she knew how to interact with people and to bring out the best in others. She was a good listener. And when you actually look at the comments of her co-stars, people like Cary Grant, she was the one person singled out to be the person easiest to work with, the most likable and so on. And she was very much of a person who would work hard and get along with people and try to find a way of making everyone better in any production. So this ability to work with others, this interpersonal effectiveness was very much one of her strengths. And also too, this aspect of self-potency. Again, I mean, she made things happen in her own life. She didn't just sit back and let things drift along. She could have. She was wealthy. She could have just married early in life, had children. There's nothing wrong with that. But she wanted more in her life, or something different in her life. And she took the plunge in terms of going into acting. She knew how it would turn out, but she wanted it. And she made it happen and so on. And she succeeded. So she very much represented this aspect of self-potency. And then later as well, she certainly manifested success drive. She had this push to succeed, and she had her goals, and she achieved her goals at very high levels. And so she's very admirable in terms of her level, really, of ability to translate her wishes, her goals into action and into accomplishment. So I think that kind of gives us a sense, really, of the Kelly family, their bases for achievement, the foundations of their achievement, and so on, and how we can maybe look at them really as this model of success, and maybe even saying to ourselves, if they can succeed, why can't you succeed?